SpongeBob SquarePants is one of those shows that are filled with iconic and classic episodes. But what about all the episodes that we never got to see? What about SpongeBob's lost episodes? Well, to be more specific, throughout the years we found out about many unmade or planned episodes that were ultimately scrapped, confirmed directly by the show's staff in different interviews, tweets, and articles. And it would have been really cool to see some of these ideas come to fruition, since they considered many interesting premises, like Patrick working for Plankton at the Chum Bucket. Why does SpongeBob have a square shape if he's supposed to be a sea sponge? Or who was Pearl's real mother? One small, weird detail from the show's cast of characters that has never been explained is how can Mr. Krabs have a whale for a daughter? It's something bizarre that's never been revealed, but back in 2015, executive producer Vincent Waller shared on Twitter how the writing staff once considered making an episode that would have revolved around the origin of Pearl, with him saying that they even did an outline for the basic plot of the episode. This idea was rejected and never ended up being produced, after series creator Steven Hillenburg declined the idea, since he preferred to keep it a mystery. And I do agree, having Pearl be Mr. Krabs' daughter is already pretty ridiculous, but not even explaining it makes their entire relationship and the concept of a crab with a whale for a daughter even funnier. Series writer Richard Purcell talked about the Pearl episode during a Q&A he had with the Art of SpongeBob Discord server in 2021, where he said that he had written two different episode ideas. One was about Pearl's origin, and the other one was about SpongeBob's origin. However, much like the aforementioned story for Pearl, SpongeBob's origin story was also directly rejected by Steven Hillenburg himself. The only details that we know about this potential origin story is that it would have explained why SpongeBob has a square shape. Richard Purcell said that the story would begin with SpongeBob as a normal sea sponge until he was captured by a Cyclops, who later took SpongeBob to a factory on land where he cut him into his traditional square shape, finally giving us an answer as to why SpongeBob looks like a square sponge rather than an actual sea sponge. An interesting fact that's sort of related to all this is that Steven Hillenburg actually created a short comic book years before he pitched his cartoon idea to Nickelodeon that was later used as a basis for his conception of the series. The comic was named The Intertidal Zone, and Hillenburg created it in 1984 when he was still working as a teacher for the Ocean Institute. In that comic, there was a character named Bob the Sponge, a character that looks like a traditional real-life sea sponge but with sunglasses. And while they are pretty different, this character still served as an early prototype of sorts for SpongeBob. So it's cool that we do have a version of him that has the shape of a real marine sponge. A common practice for the development of a TV show is the creation of a series Bible, which is a document that describes the general premise of the show, as well as a detailed description of its main characters, settings, and the world that they envision for the series. SpongeBob's original series Bible is particularly remarkable, since it was mainly done by Steven Hillenburg, and it's amazing to see just how clear his vision for the show was so early on, given that it perfectly described the final result that we eventually saw. There are a number of differences between the series Bible and the final series. The Krusty Krab was written with a C instead of a K. Krabby Patties were originally called Barnacle Burgers, and the show's original title was going to be SpongeBoy Ahoy, but this had to be changed because the Flaming Carrot Comics had already trademarked a character called SpongeBoy.
Oh, Mr. Krabs, can I get my paycheck?
SpongeBoy me Bob!
The Bible also included a number of episode descriptions, and while some of them ended up being made in the end, there were a lot of premises that were ultimately passed on, or that their premises were later reused for future episodes with different plot lines. For example, the document detailed an idea for an episode where Mr. Krabs asked SpongeBob to work the 4 AM shift at the Krusty Krab, and SpongeBob gets so excited about working late at night that he can't fall asleep. He then thinks of skipping sleep altogether and getting to work early without resting. The episode would later cut to SpongeBob working his ass off at a completely packed Krusty Krab filled with customers, and Mr. Krabs dancing from excitement, counting all that money. But then it would show that SpongeBob was actually sleeping in his house the entire time, and he never got to work the late night shift. Ultimately, the show would go on to do a similar premise for the season 2 episode titled Graveyard Shift, that had SpongeBob and Squidward working late at night.
Nosferatu!
A really interesting premise detailed in the Bible would have shown Patrick trying to get a job at the Krusty Krab. But after Mr. Krabs rejects him, Patrick would be approached by Plankton to offer him a job at the Chum Bucket. Plankton would do this as a way to manipulate Patrick into giving him information about the Krabby Patty secret formula, since he's such close friends with SpongeBob. This is actually the only unused episode from the series Bible that has concept art drawn for it, showing Patrick actually working at the Chum Bucket as Plankton watches him. Even though this exact episode idea wasn't made, throughout the show's run we have seen instances where Plankton has technically employed Patrick, such as in the Fry Cook games. Another interesting detail from the early conception of the show is that Sandy was originally envisioned as a surfer. It was only later that they would retool the character into being more into science, karate, and extreme sports in general like we see in the final series. One of the unused premises from the Bible would have revolved around this aspect, for a story that would see the Krusty Krab sponsoring Sandy as she plans to ride a huge tidal wave that's approaching Bikini Bottom, with them planning to have SpongeBob taking a picture of Sandy wearing a Krusty Krab t-shirt as she's surfing the wave. Plankton would hear about this, and decided to sponsor Patrick for him to also surf this huge wave, but wearing a Chum Bucket banner attached to his board. While this episode was never made, Sandy has been shown surfing during the show itself. Yet another unused premise from the series Bible would have shown Squidward and SpongeBob at the Krusty Krab restocking the fridge with salty sodas. As they're doing this, Squidward would go to the bathroom for a bit, leaving SpongeBob alone with all the sodas. But his willpower wasn't strong enough, so he would start to drink the sodas. And since they're salty, they wouldn't satiate his thirst, so he would continue drinking them non-stop until he became really bloated and enlarged. Squidward noticed this and tried to help SpongeBob, since he became so inflated that his buoyancy would cause him to float around the Krusty Krab, and once Mr. Krabs returns, they would try to hide SpongeBob's problem from him. Another example of a couple characters who had different concepts originally are Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. Since, while Mermaid Man is portrayed in the series Bible in a pretty similar way to how he'd eventually be depicted, Barnacle Boy was actually named Barnacle Bill initially, and he was envisioned as the saltiest sailor known to the 7 seas, salty enough that he's able to breathe seawater without any issue, and his entire body would be made out of wood, with the exception of his head. The Bible detailed a story where Mermaid Man and Barnacle Bill would be showing home movies about their old adventures at the Krusty Krab, but they would both start arguing with each other, to the point that they wanted to solve it with a wrestling match. During their struggle, Mermaid Man would break off Barnacle Bill's pig arm, something that would really offend Bill, despite Mermaid Man apologizing and trying to make amends. The episode would end with their feud being resolved by their old nemesis, Ken the Giant Sea Cucumber. One premise that was also included in the Bible was the story revolving around SpongeBob feeling self-conscious about his prominent front teeth and overbite after no one notices him at the beach. He was craving attention. SpongeBob would ask Patrick for help with this issue, who then tried to inflate SpongeBob's lips until they exploded. The story ends with SpongeBob in the hospital, with Sandy visiting him. In another unused story, Mr. Krabs would buy a new karaoke machine in order to attract more business for the Krusty Krab, with Pearl instantly falling in love with it. Once Pearl would actually start to sing though, she would have sounded like the real-life mating call of a humpback whale, causing every single customer to leave the Krusty Krab immediately. The conflict of the episode would come from Krabs being torn between telling his daughter that she can't sing and hurting her feelings, or losing money. Sweet, sweet money. The last potential premise that was included in the series Bible that was never turned into an episode described a story where Mr. Krabs would turn the Krusty Krab into a ship-like vessel, complete with cannons that would shoot out barnacle burgers. Mr. Krabs would pilot the ship across the sea, with Spongebob, Squidward, and also Patrick joining him as the ship's crew. They would eventually encounter Plankton during their road trip, who's also traveling the seas with a chum bucket submarine, and the two restaurant ships would begin to attack each other until Plankton finally surrendered. During an interview with Hogan's Alley magazine, Derek Dryman, who worked on the show as creative director until 2004, said that Steven Hillenburg's original premise for the pilot episode of the show was going to be a road trip style story with SpongeBob and Squidward, inspired by the movie Pow Wow Highway starring Gary Farmer. And Dryman mentioned that the dynamic between SpongeBob and Squidward was really developed while they worked on this initial premise, and he even said that they conceived the concept of a starfish character as they were developing this original idea, who was first thought of as the owner of a roadside bar that SpongeBob and Squidward would have visited during their trip, and the character would have been very angry and a bully, with him being insecure because he was pink. Of course, they continued developing on the series concepts and these ideas, and the pink starfish character we got was ultimately very different than this first description of him. Eventually though, Hillenburg opted to go with Help Wanted as the show's pilot episode in the end, and later on they reused this road trip idea during the classic pizza delivery episode from season 1, and it was even included as one of the original episode ideas in the series Bible. During that same interview for Hogan's Alley magazine that we just mentioned, storyboard artist and director Jay Lender revealed that during season 2's production he was assigned to write an episode about SpongeBob's birthday, and he wasn't very excited about the idea. According to him, the general plot was going to be that everyone in Bikini Bottom seemingly forgot about SpongeBob's birthday, which obviously would have made him sad, until suddenly everyone jumps out and throws him a surprise birthday party. It's something that sounds generic and cliche, so Lender admits that he really didn't want to do it, so much so that he went into Steven Hillenburg's office and told him that if they did do this episode, SpongeBob would be over. A little overdramatic, I think, but he was right in pointing out how boring the premise sounded, and even though the idea was assigned to other writers and artists, none of them found the premise to be interesting enough, and the episode was never produced. However, they did make a special episode titled SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout, which, much like the rejected episode idea, also had SpongeBob's friends planning to throw a surprise party for him, and the episode even showed live-action versions of some of the characters, which was actually really nice. In 2020, animator and writer Adam Poloyan shared some details about an episode idea that he never got to pitch for the show. It was called A Day in the Life of Plankton, and it would have revolved around what Plankton does in a normal, regular day when he isn't trying to steal the Krabby Patty formula, with the episode deriving comedy out of his everyday routine and him struggling to do menial chores. The story would have also been very short, around 4 to 5 minutes, and with minimal sound, mostly just using ambient noises, and the entire thing would have been set in the chum bucket. Adam also shared a storyboard from the episode on Twitter, showing Plankton trying to eat an entire grape. And look at him, that's way too big for him. It's really cute. But hey, at least it's not a hologram.
What do we got here? Oh, goody! Holographic meatloaf again!
More than 10 years ago on January 2014, Australian broadcasting company Foxtel released its television schedule for the month, and they included synopses for some very interesting SpongeBob episodes which hadn't aired yet. Many fans noticed this, and the synopses were reposted on the SpongeBob community forums. The first one of these episodes was titled Dueling Picnics, a story about Mr. Krabs organizing the first Krusty Krab annual company picnic. An episode that actually ended up being made, but under the title Company Picnic. But the other two premises were ultimately scrapped. Krabs' Army was the name of the second synopsis, and it would have shown Mr. Krabs putting SpongeBob and Squidward through a military-style boot camp since he thought they were slacking on the job. The third of these planned episode ideas was titled SpongeBob Invader Pants, which would have shown SpongeBob and Patrick being obsessed with contacting alien life, leading them to ask Sandy to build a device that could transmit the delicious smell of Krabby Patties into outer space. Storyboard artist and director from the show, Casey Alexander, later provided some more details about this premise during a Q&A, saying that we would have seen a couple of aliens arriving at the Krusty Krab and ordering some food, but Mr. Krabs wouldn't have accepted their alien currency. So the aliens decide to take the Krusty Krab up into space and force SpongeBob to cook some Krabby Patties. Ultimately, much like with Krabs' Army, this episode would end up being scrapped, with Vincent Waller later stating on Twitter that the episode was shelved once the writing staff of the show started working on the second SpongeBob movie, Sponge Out of Water, and this concept apparently never made it past the storyboarding stage. Another premise that was revealed by being listed on the internet was an episode titled Krusty Krab Bed and Breakfast, which was listed on Poland's Nickelodeon website. Vincent Waller later clarified that this was just meant to be the working title for a future episode. And years later in 2024, we did finally get to see a story where the Krusty Krab started selling breakfast during season 14's Necro Nom Nom Nomicon, although it's unknown if it's related to the original Bed and Breakfast episode listing. Around 2020, Vincent Waller described on a deleted Twitter thread an episode idea titled Pineapple Panic, giving a simple synopsis saying that the citizens of Bikini Bottom would begin to panic as SpongeBob's pineapple home started growing uncontrollably over the entire town, but we don't have any other details regarding this unused premise. On December 2022, this promotional image was uploaded to Discord, advertising what was going to be the original 200th episode of the show, titled Best Friends for Never. The plot would have revolved around SpongeBob and Patrick learning that sea sponges and starfish aren't usually friends in nature, something that would have torn their friendship apart, and the situation would have escalated to the point that it eventually affected all of Bikini Bottom. The episode idea was reportedly shelved after the show's crew began production on Sponge Out of Water, and the 200th episode of the show ended up being Goodbye Krabby Patty instead. A few years ago in 2022, there were multiple script outlines listed on eBay for SpongeBob episodes that hadn't been produced yet, and which were ultimately never made. One of these episode ideas was titled My Pet Pat, created by series writer Derek Iverson during 2009 for the 7th season of the show. The episode would have opened with Patrick holding up the line at the Krusty Krab, with Squidward calling him a moron, and others in line agreeing with him. This would make Patrick realize that people don't treat him with any respect and view him as a clown, so he'd storm out of there, but ended up slipping on a pickle, resulting in everyone at the restaurant to start laughing. Even SpongeBob started laughing. Patrick would run back to his house in shame, and later saw a suspicious TV ad promising starfish a road to dignity if they met with the quote-unquote respect coach at the docks at midnight. Patrick would fall for this obvious trap, and ends up being captured and sold to some starfish poachers. And, according to the outline, they would have only shown the poachers' legs on screen, much like how Tom and Jerry cartoons used to show their human characters. SpongeBob would eventually find out that Pat had been kidnapped and started searching for him. And once he finds him, he sees that Patrick has become completely domesticated and he actually enjoys being a pet. He convinces SpongeBob to stay with him and try being a pet, so SpongeBob agrees and disguises himself as a starfish, since the poachers only collect starfish and they view all other creatures as food, implying that they eventually would have found out that SpongeBob was disguising himself and would have tried to eat him. Another listed script was titled Red Riptide, written by Richard Purcell in 2005, and it was envisioned to be a 4-minute short. It would have been about Mrs. Puff showing a safety film during boating school that compiled multiple boat crashes and road accidents as a precaution for future drivers. SpongeBob would freak out after watching it, with him leaping through the projector screen and leaving a silhouette with a shape, and another one through the wall of the class, with Mrs. Puff later saying, "Let's hope that'll scare away SpongeBob for good." Something that's very in character for her. Continuing with these rejected episode outlines, we have Pineapple Princess, a story that would have shown SpongeBob and Patrick meeting the titular Pineapple Princess while they were out blowing bubbles. She's described as being the princess of a place called Bikini Top, and after she starts hanging out with the guys, SpongeBob eventually starts finding missing posters with the princess's face on them, so they decide to help her return home, even though she doesn't really want to. We later find out that her home is actually the Bikini Top grocery store, and her father, the quote-unquote king of the store, is actually just a regular overweight guy on a lawn chair, who thanks SpongeBob and Patrick for returning his daughter safely. Years later, during season 14, they re-envisioned the concept of Bikini Top as the prehistoric version of Bikini Bottom for the episode Hysterical History. Sponge Sprite was the title of a potential season 7 episode about Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy. It starts with SpongeBob visiting Patrick after finding an old VHS tape of the only episode of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy they had never seen. They begin watching this lost episode and see that a character bears a striking resemblance to SpongeBob, with this Sponge Boy being attacked by a group of cyborg turtle warriors who are only stopped once Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy intervene. The heroes later start having a string of very bad luck, and the Sponge Boy would start following them around, being very irritating. It would later be revealed that the Sponge Boy character is actually an interdimensional sprite that's able to warp reality itself, much like Mr. Mxyzptlk or Batmite from DC Comics. And as a comic book nerd, I actually like this idea very much. It could have been either a goofy fun little story, or just plain annoying if the sprite was too irritating, but it does sound legitimately interesting. Next we have an outline for an episode called Surf and Turf, although they also consider other possible titles such as Locals Only, Wacko Tacos, or Sea Treats from the sea to your tummy. The story would have revolved around Mr. Krabs trying to sell Krabby Patties to humans on the surface, after Sandy told him that his Krabby Patties are better than anything she's had on dry land, and that humans eat even more than her. This gives Mr. Krabs the idea to send SpongeBob to the surface to sell Krabby Patties, with SpongeBob setting up shop on a beach, represented by using 60s beach party stock footage. And whenever a human being interacted directly with SpongeBob to buy some patties, they would have been portrayed by only showing their legs and their hands with money to pay SpongeBob, similar to cartoons like Tom and Jerry or how Cow and Chicken show their parents. They also consider using this technique in My Pet Pat, another unproduced outline we previously discussed. Surf and Turf would ultimately be rejected, and years later they reused the title for a season 11 episode that had a completely different premise than this unmade episode. The last episode outline that was listed on eBay was for a potential season 5 episode titled Camp Head Trauma. It would have opened with Patrick finding SpongeBob practicing some wildlife animal calls. When Patrick asks him why he's doing that, SpongeBob tells him that he's practicing because he's gonna fulfill his lifelong dream of attending camp, with Patrick getting excited at the idea and deciding to tag along. Once they arrive at Camp Head Trauma, the both of them start being tormented by all of the other campers there. They do stuff like switch their bug spray for honey, steal their bathing suits, and laugh at them for having to swim in their underwear. SpongeBob and Patrick also get scared by a horror story told by the camp counselor, where he described a terrifying zombie hyena fish hybrid that's apparently on the loose. The guys get very discouraged and almost leave the camp, but they decide to give it one more chance by participating in the camp talent show. Of course, the rest of the campers aren't impressed by their performance at the show and immediately boo them, but the event is interrupted by the zombie hyena fish that was mentioned earlier, and as the monster is about to attack everyone, SpongeBob saves the day by doing an animal call of a lion's roar and spooking the zombie hyena away, with him and Patrick being awarded good camper badges afterwards and finally being accepted by the campers. While Camp Head Trauma was ultimately never made, it was allegedly replaced with a season 5 episode, The Inmates of Summer, that showed SpongeBob and Patrick planning to go to summer camp, but they ended up going to a prison camp by mistake instead. Also, years later, Nickelodeon ended up making an entire prequel spin-off show with SpongeBob in Camp Coral. One thing that I've always found curious is how Nickelodeon hasn't done many official crossovers with SpongeBob. Whenever we see him cross over with other franchises or properties, it's usually done in video game form. Hell, he's even gonna appear in the new Sonic racing game. But the few times we've seen SpongeBob cross over with other cartoons, it was during promotional bumpers on Nick, such as a cross promotion that happened between Jimmy Neutron and SpongeBob in the early 2000s, where Jimmy would randomly pop up on select episodes to promote his show, and mess up the transmission of the SpongeBob episodes in the process.
We promise, Mr. Krabs.
I need a sailor's promise. Repeat after me. Yo-ho, yo-ho. Near the hooks, I'll never go.
Yo-ho, yo-ho.
However, what if I told you that we almost got to see a crossover between SpongeBob and Ren and Stimpy, and surprisingly, it wasn't going to happen in the 90s, it was actually being developed in 2015. This was revealed by John Kay, Ren and Stimpy's original creator, when he released a DVD compilation of shorts featuring his character George Liquor, a project that was funded through Kickstarter in 2012, with it being officially released during 2019. And on this DVD, John Kay included a short animatic featuring Ren, Stimpy, and Ren's cousin Sven watching SpongeBob on the TV. Ren starts berating Stimpy and Sven for watching a dumb cartoon for kids, since he prefers to watch smarter adult cartoons like The Simpsons. As they're watching the TV, SpongeBob promotes the release of his then upcoming new movie, Sponge Out of Water, which they all go to see. After they finish the movie, we see that Ren actually liked it so much that it made him cry, admitting that SpongeBob is actually a good show, and the short ends with Stimpy giving Ren a sponge bath.
You ready for your sponge bath?
Okay.
Okay.
Joy.
This animatic was envisioned as being a short that would have aired before the Sponge Out of Water movie started during its theater showings. And while we don't know the exact reason why it was rejected, if you're familiar with John Kay, then you know that he's filled with controversies and abuse allegations, so it's not really surprising if Nickelodeon didn't want any kind of association with him. Ren and Stimpy as a franchise has also been tainted by the awful adult party cartoon revival that aired on Spike TV, a project that pretty much killed the franchise, although the original show is still fondly remembered by fans, and there have been reports throughout the years that it might be rebooted once again. So, those were a whole bunch of cancelled and rejected episode ideas that we never got to see. And, of course, there are probably dozens of other unproduced scripts and premises that have never been leaked or revealed in any way that we simply don't know of. But this kind of thing is really common for any long-running show, especially a show that's 26 years old like SpongeBob. 26? Really? Damn. What did you think about these episode ideas? I personally like the idea of a plankton-centric episode that's just his regular day-to-day life. And Patrick working at the chum bucket. I mean, just look at this concept art and how charming it is. Patrick looks so jovial. Also, the fact that John K thought that Nick would approve a Ren and Stimpy crossover with SpongeBob after he's had so many scandals is honestly kinda insane. And pretty stupid. I really don't know what he was thinking. But what do you think about the idea of SpongeBob crossing over with other characters in animation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And, as always, thank you so much for watching.